Should school children be required to take math classes until 18? Is it a win that England is requiring new homes to be built with gigabit internet capability? And is the fact that the House wants to investigate the FBI, DOJ, DHS, and others a sign of democracy dying? We answer those questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This, of course, is the podcast where we go through our social media feeds. We find some of the best and some of the worst takes out there, and we like to break down what we like or dislike about them. And hopefully we explain things in a way that's a little bit different than maybe the normal narrative you're used to hearing. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host, Britt. Before we launch in, just a reminder to like and comment and share. All that good stuff helps us out a ton. We appreciate it. Okay, so we'll move into our first take of the episode. And this is a BuzzFeed article reading, "People are showing off their products that are still in perfect condition years later, and it's an FU to capitalism," with a subheading reading, "Either these products are magic or some people are way better at taking care of their property than I am. I think it's the latter." So, this is a little bit more of a lighthearted article, but I actually think it underlies a lot, right, of how people think. And so what do you think about this, Britt? Is this a big middle finger to capitalism?
No, it is not a big middle finger to capitalism. So they definitely get that. Daniela Emanuel, the BuzzFeed staff, gets that part wrong. I found this really interesting, though, and I was just talking to my wife about this, and we were driving somewhere, and I was thinking about the Federal Reserve and thinking about like how it forces people to spend, and how, people think of the Federal Reserve as like this nerdy thing when you hear about, modern monetary policy or fractional reserve banking. It sounds like some dude in glasses and, slick back haircut being like hovered over a calculator. But it's like, no, like all those things cascade into not only like how people save and the culture of consumerism in the United States, but also to like how companies decide how to make their products, right? Whether they actually have built-in redundancy, or if they're going to, built-in failure because they need to keep selling more because the monetary supply continues to get larger and larger. So therefore, you have to keep selling stuff. And I think this is a great example of like if you had a structural society where money was constant, it didn't expand or shrink, but the supply of actual like value in the society grew. That means that you could buy more with less money, which is what we'd have. But because people print so much money, now it drives these different types of behaviors where people want, these software as a subscription, or they want to build, refrigerators that break after a few years. It's not a surprise that there's a correlation between companies building in like built-in failure with also the Federal Reserve and the more printing of money and all these different things, because it's created a culture of consumerism, of like having to constantly compete with inflation. And so you and I don't recognize that as capitalism. To bring it all the way back to the original post, that is not an FU to capitalism. That is an FU to the modern monetary policy that have been driven, and the companies, they're just adapting to what the current environments are.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would offer is I think planned obsolescence. That idea that things are designed.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Things are designed to fail and self-sabotage or whatever. I think that is to some degree true for sure. However, I also think that there's a lot of things now that can be made in a cheaper, more efficient manner that aren't meant to last in the same way because access has increased.
Sure.
So if you think about it in the sense of, oh man, my microwave used to last me, 30 years, and now I have to buy one every 10 years. It's like, okay, well, sure, there is a trade-off there. I'm not denying that. But you also have to recognize that buying a microwave 30 years ago would have been a much larger portion of your personal wealth and your disposable income. And so now, even just 30 years later, buying a microwave for most people isn't a huge deal. It's not the end of the world. You can manage to afford one fairly easily. And if you need one that isn't as expensive, they have that option. You have a much broader range of the quality of the kinds of products and the kinds of services that are being offered now because access has increased. So if someone wants to pay for something that won't last 30 years because maybe they don't need it for 30 years, maybe they're thinking, well, I'm going to move. I don't have the liquid cash to expend on a 30-year lasting microwave right now. I'd rather just get something to suit my temporary needs.
Yeah.
Or I need this for like a small, small break room. It's not going to get used very often. It doesn't need to have the kind of long lasting. You have a diversity of ability to have access to things that last short and long amounts of time. I think a lot of people assume that when something that they buy is the standard and it's not lasting as long as the standard from 30 years ago, they assume those are equivalent. But in many ways, if you adjusted for how big of an expense an item might have been, 30 years ago, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, you can still pay about the roughly the same amount and have an item that will last that long. People will say, oh, my tools used to last me 40 years. You can probably pay a very high market price for very high quality, long lasting tools.
That's a fantastic point.
But people don't want to take that into consideration because now you can go get a set of tools and comparatively it's like, well, this is so much cheaper. I shouldn't have to pay, $700 for a drill. But equivalently, a couple decades ago, and that's the rough estimate of what you would have had to pay for something that also lasted that long.
Yeah, that's a really great point about how, like, what capitalism does is it makes it at the end of the day, it makes it better for people that did not have as much as they, their betters used to at a different point in history. I shouldn't say betters; they're the people that have more than them.
Right. Yeah.
And like, and I think this is also like, you and I kind of synonymously associate capitalism with like people being free to choose or like free markets or, the science of human action. And like, this is a beautiful display of it, right? It's hardly an FU to capitalism. It's people that have limited resources. Maybe they have a lot more time, right? Like I think about my dad, came from the Philippines. When he got to the United States, was like, wow, I can buy a lawnmower, like a used lawnmower, and I can like mow my lawn instead of having to do all these different ways of cutting grass or just letting it grow long. So he got this really crappy lawnmower, short on cash, but high on motivation and time. So he spent a lot of time fixing it up, a lot of time repairing it, a lot of sweat equity, as my parents described it to me, because he had a lot of that and he didn't have a lot of money initially, right? And so a lot of these people, that's like people making trade-offs, right? It's like, I will buy the worst thing and I'll take better care of it because I have more time than I have capital. And that's the beautiful thing about capitalism. People have that option. They have that choice. And that's what, Bernie Sanders complains that you go to the grocery store and there's 50 cans of peanut butter that you can choose from. It's like, well, shoot, man, like because there's 50 cans of peanut, that means there's enough people to buy and have a wide variety of tastes to buy that amount of variety of peanut butter. And would you rather people not have the option? I guess I would rather people have that option because I believe people make the best choice that they can for themselves.
That's absolutely right. The other dimension is that the trade-offs that capitalism provides with the number of products you have means that different products have different trade-offs. So before, when you have that, that lawnmower that you can buy used and you put a lot of sweat equity into it, right? It basically has the trade-off of it, maybe it costs a lot initially, but will last long or have, components that make it durable so you can repair it in the future and it will last you a long time. That's great. Now we have options that are, you can buy a lawnmower that is very expensive and will last you a long time. You can also buy a lawnmower that is cheaper and more accessible. Maybe it won't last you as long, but if you're renting a house for a few years and you don't need it to last that long, that's great. You also have options that they're electronic battery, they're quiet, they're writable, whatever it is. You have way more options, not even to move into the realm of things like that integrate electronic chips and CPUs and things like that. So sure, you might have more failure points on a car now because it's integrated with computer components, but it can also do an infinite number of things higher than original cars could. What people value is going to shape the market. And so there are people who just want something simple and long lasting, and there are options for that. That generally costs a lot of money to produce that kind of thing. And so that's your market. That's where you've got. And if there's enough demand, then the prices can lower for that sort of thing. But for the vast majority of people, the exponentially increased ability of certain devices to do things is worth that trade-off. Even people complaining about the fall off of smartphones or something, with planned obsolescence there, people say, oh, they make my iPhone go slower in 3 years or whatever, and they didn't used to do that. Well, for one, that's a little bit of conjecture, but two, your phone can also do infinitely more things than it could. The first iPhone is comparably low tech to the most modern iteration, and smartphones haven't even been out for more than 2 decades. Think about that. Like, smartphones are 2 decades, not even 2 decades old, and the first iterations and the most recent ones are just completely different products in their terms of their ability to access and do things. So when you talk about, oh, it's not as long lasting, it's kind of like, yeah, but you're paying in many ways for expanded abilities and expanded things to do. It's almost like you're not even buying the same product.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, moving to our next post here, and this is an article, a piece of an article. There's a link to a full article written by Peter Hitchens, who, of course, is the brother of Christopher Hitchens. Interesting thing to note, Christopher Hitchens, of course, a renowned atheist, one of the new atheist wave writers, author of The God Delusion. Peter Hitchens is his brother, who is, in fact, an Anglican, I believe, a Christian.
Oh, no way.
And they actually split very strongly on that, but I think they still had a good relationship, which is interesting. Anyway, so Peter Hitchens is a more traditional conservative, and he writes this article in response to the new prime minister. I believe his name is Rishi Sunak, I want to say. His new policy, which is expanding the mandatory schooling age of math requirements. I believe they had to take math to age 16 or something like that, and now it's all the way up to 18, requiring students to be in math classes through 18 years old. And Peter Hitchens' tweet and link to his article reads, "Teaching us maths until we are 80 won't solve the problems of our schools. You have to teach them properly." And so, of course, this is a critique on that policy, which would expand the required age of math classes for public school. What are your thoughts on this, Britt?
Yeah, so my opinion is going to be pretty skewed in that I'm a homeschooler. I think Peter Hitchens is absolutely correct. So this is a very good take. And my opinion is skewed because the way my mother decided what we were going to learn was based on competency within that, right? So if we were naturally good at something, we would do this. It's called standardized testing, and these ladies who could facilitate it, they offered it as a service to homeschoolers, would show up to our church once per year. At the end of the year, we take it, and then they kind of assign us, where we were at within our educational, competency within math and reading and language and all these other areas. And this was through the, first grade through sixth grade. And basically, like, whatever we were at was like, okay, you're good, you're doing great, and I'm going to give you a book at that competency. And when you're done with that book, you're done with school. So if you finish that within a month of the school year, you're done. If you finish it you take the whole school year to finish it, then that's what it takes. So it was really awesome, right? Because it was like very much based on, am I actually learning this, and can I actually demonstrate competency in this, not sitting in a seat and doing assignments because that is what the schedule calls for. And so I personally really enjoyed that. I know that not everyone, or not every person or kid or child, is going to necessarily fit within that. But I think the principle is still the same, is that you should be teaching for competency, not because you want to have kids in seats so that teachers can collect a paycheck.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And even as maybe, I don't know if it's the right term to say it's cliche, but it is, the phrase, you've got to teach them properly. You can't just expect them to learn after enough time. I mean, he's right. There's a reason why school teachers and schooling educators debate about different types of methods for teaching, and it's because the way you teach something matters. It's not good enough just to explain 2 + 2 = 4, moving on. Whether or not you agree with some of the new standards of how you have to teach math, or how you have to, the idea is that there are different methods for teaching things, and different students require different methods and different patterns, and whether that's math, whether that's public speaking, whether that's history, people learn in many different ways. And so I think even the just the notion that with enough time, and mandated requirement of math, we're going to have a more scientific population, or a population that's going to be able to catch on to I don't know, the rest of the world in cybersecurity, or whatever his sort of end policy goal is. It's just very backwards to think that requiring students in another one size fits all method is going to do it. As you described, you were homeschooled, I was homeschooled, and I think seeing that we had a lot of flexibility in our different ways to learn it with methods that did or didn't work. We any good teacher and parent isn't going to look at a student struggling with something repeatedly over time and time and think, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, right? No one's going to do that in their right mind. They're going to be able to say, okay, well, this approach isn't working, let's try a new one. Let's maybe this subject isn't necessary in certain ways, or maybe we just need to try a different approach. You can't do that when you're in a public school with a full classroom of students that have differing needs. And so keeping them in, requiring them to take maths until 18 is just 2 more years of doing the same thing. It's just bashing your head against the wall for an extended period of time.
Did they mention, I haven't read the article, but did they mention like what their problems are? Are students just not hitting the benchmarks that they're supposed to? Or
I believe so. I haven't seen the official policy justification, but I would think that if it's anything like Washington State, we've had, because of COVID in particular, mass amounts of learning loss. I want to say 52% of public school students did not hit the acceptable grade standards for math. It was something like 38 or 40 something for
crazy.
English, and 52% for math. So I imagine
even by their own standards, man, that they measure it. And this kind of harkens back to the last post that we looked at, in that, like, you need to have because there should be as many options as there are individual people, in that everyone learns differently. And at the end of the day, what matters is like how well you can integrate whatever knowledge you've got into real world applications that are actually useful. This is kind of a weird example, but it came to my mind, in that I took Taekwondo for almost 5 years as a kid. And it was awesome. I took it because my parents wanted me to learn like self-defense and everything. But I went to a school that like really frowned upon actual sparring. There was no contact. Like when you ever threw a technique, you were not allowed to you were allowed to barely tap the person, even in a tournament or anything like that. So like, even though I progressed to almost purple belt in that, I started just training Muay Thai recently, which is another like striking discipline. And like, there is actual sparring in it. There's actual like strength and conditioning. There's actual like, you're not trying to hurt each other, but you are trying to replicate like an actual self-defense situation. And within just a couple months of me doing that, obviously way surpassed anything that I learned in Taekwondo, because like this was the right environment for me to actually learn the skill of self-defense. Whereas the other one was just like doing drills for the heck of it, which I think a lot of folks, maybe this works for some people, right, in Taekwondo, but in public school, right, like just doing drills for the heck of it, it will work for a percentage of people. It's probably not going to work for the majority. Definitely not for the plurality either of folks. So when you have a monopoly on the school system, something as important, right, as the education of our students, you probably should have a lot of options. Competition would probably do it really well.
I think you put it perfectly. I don't even know that I have anything to add. I think that's a great example. Yeah. Okay, moving to our next post here, we have a quote tweet from 2 politicians. So the original tweet is from Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who tweets a video and has the caption, "It's time to begin, and they can't stop what's coming." And it's talking about the new legislative year ahead. And former Representative Adam Kinzinger tweets, "They can stop it with 4 votes." So, what do you think? Is this rebuttal of the inspirational take from Marjorie Taylor Greene on point, or
it was really on point, man. I don't know if we've ever actually had Adam Kinzinger quote, or
once or
take.
twice, if at all. But yeah, I don't know.
But either way, I thought if we've had it, I'm pretty sure they were bad. Or if we were going to have it, I would anticipate it'd be bad. And so this one I say is good. Like, he's absolutely right. Like, this is the unsaid truth, the quiet part out loud about our system of government, is that, people in Washington can be told no by people in Florida, and vice versa, even though we're on literal opposite ends of the country. And so, yeah, Adam's totally right about this. Whether you think this is a good thing or not, I mean, I'll leave that to you to kind of expound upon.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is the system is so versatile and so in flux that it can be a good thing or a bad thing. And I think this is a good take because it highlights the truth, right? It's not,
Yeah.
he's not saying, it's a good or a bad thing necessarily. He's just highlighting the reality, which is this system, if you're doing a good action or if you're doing a bad action, can equally be stopped by 4 votes or by a majority. And in some cases, that's really good because there have been a lot of stupid bills. There have been a lot of stupid laws that want to get passed. Probably the majority, if you think about it. But conversely, there are a lot of good things that get stopped by a small minority. Although usually it's by a large majority of people who don't want something. But there have been times when really good things have been stopped by a couple of cowards or a couple of people who just want power and control. And so you realize that even though especially in particular, the House of Representatives is supposed to be this democratic representative of the population, it's supposed to be the most down to earth situation, I guess, of that can be stopped by 4 people, right? That can the most representative system that's supposed to represent every American, the closest thing to direct democracy we have, can be stopped by 4 people. Cool, great. So now we have a really bad system, and no matter how you shake it, I don't know, that to me just strikes as like kind of pathetic for what's supposed to be the most democratic institution in the U.S. Cool. Well, 4 people just overrode, whether or not you have the right to be taxed or tax free of something. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite literally the 51% ruling over the 49% in a lot of ways. The more I look at this take, the more I like it because usually I like Marjorie Taylor Greene's stuff. Like, I think she previously has been pretty anti-establishment, and now for whatever reason it doesn't appear to be. But like, this is the promise of what she's saying. Like, it's time to begin, and they can't stop us because you voted us in. That's like the promise every politician makes ever. Like, it's like, oh, if you vote all of us in, like, we're gonna make change happen. It's like, no, that's not really how it works, though. Like, the way everything's built out, like Adam Kinzinger is saying, like 4 people could stop it, 10 people can stop it, 20 people could. I mean, I don't even know what the largest majority of parties had, but I can't imagine it's like triple digits or anything like that. So it's like you could always stop it with X amount of votes. The 51% can say no to the other 49%. The founding fathers had a lot of good reasons for that. Whether or not we actually still like value it because of those reasons, I'm not sure. But I like this take so much because of the truth of what it does. I think it's kind of inadvertently a red pill for people to realize that, like, yeah, even if you vote in Republicans, it's still not going to change anything.
Yeah, well, and the last thing I'll say on this too is that Kinzinger he prides himself as a big democracy defender. That's the sort of the key phrase that a lot of the neocons love to flock to. And he's kind of inadvertently highlighting a weakness, which they would also claim is their strength. But it is just very funny to see someone very plainly showing the weakness of democracy, which, as much as you may or may not agree with the outcome of the election or the particular parties, a lot of people were dissatisfied. And yet the Republicans, which should have challenged the status quo, barely squeaked by. And I think a lot of that had to do with some of the cowardice of the Republicans in many ways to not stand up to things stronger. And so you have a very dissatisfied electorate, and you have a very small minority of representatives who are maybe actually expressing that kind of view of the Americans. And now he's saying, guess what? The system we have in place that's so great can shut you up. We can stop this malcontent with the status quo, all of the tyranny of the Biden administration's and the Trump administration's lockdowns, all of the tyranny of the COVID stuff, all the tyranny of taxing you, taking your money to fund a war overseas and to bomb people who don't deserve to be bombed. All of that, that's going to stay in place because of 4 votes, even after a year of, 2 years of just massive malcontent. And He's proud of that. And so in that way, it kind of makes me laugh, but he is right. He is right because he's not saying he's not saying it's a good thing. So he probably means it that way, but he hasn't said that. So that's why this, I think, stays classified as a good take. Okay. Our next take comes from The Verge, tweeting an article reading, England just made gigabit internet a legal requirement for new homes. And Marquez Brownlee, who's a very popular tech reviewer on YouTube, replies W, as in win. What do you think, Britt? W or L?
Oh, big fat L for a lot of people, especially the poorest among us. I mean, I guess it's the poorest amongst the English, not necessarily us Americans. Sure. But yeah, people, imagine if all the laptops in the world had to have the Apple M1 chip in it. Like everyone, it's mandated. It's the fastest chip or whatever, the newest and greatest. Maybe you disagree, you Windows guy, but
no, it's a good chip. It's a good chip.
It's a great chip. It's a great chip. But it's so good that Senator Elizabeth Warren has mandated that we all need to have M1 chips in every single laptop. And so all the laptop companies go off, they source their M1 chips, they integrate it in, they spend the R&D costs. And now, that $500 budget laptop that you could get at Costco now has $1,000 M1 chip in it. And so now you have to buy the cheapest laptop you can get is $2,000. There's an artificial floor to what it is. Who does that help? Right? That doesn't help the poor people. If anything, it makes it way worse off for everyone because people don't have the option to choose. And so when you're designing new homes and you're setting up the internet service, I don't really know much about that infrastructure. But regardless, gigabit internet speed is going to cost something, right? And that cost is not going to be free. It's going to be passed off somewhere to someone, and someone's going to eat it. There are no such thing as free lunch in the world. Someone has to eventually pay for it. It's just a matter of when that bill comes due.
Yeah, there's so many angles on this particular topic. I mean, the first thing is just the really basic truth, as you are outlining, that regulations have a cost. So it doesn't matter what you mandate. Just by the very fact that you were saying, here is a new rule, as soon as those words have left your lips, you have added cost onto building manufacturers and into the entire industry that is responsible for creating new supply of homes. Because even if the requirement is not costly in and of itself, the fact that you have to go through all of the different regulations and that list just got longer means that you are now adding to cost. Okay. So it's gotten so bad. You might think at first it's like, oh, well, if there's only 5 rules, like you have to have water, you have to have heat, you have to have internet. That's not so bad, right? You could just read that. The problem is that that's not how these regulations work. There are so many loopholes that you have to jump through to build new homes. If in Washington state, it's a nightmare, let alone Europe, where you practically need a license to breathe in England. So, I can't imagine what the building hurdles are over there. But the more regulations you add, a small business owner now has to hire someone to make sure that everything they're doing is within these regulations. So the more you add, again, regardless of the actual cost of the regulation, is going to add cost because it's a regulation. I maybe I mentioned this before. I don't think I have. There was a study that came out, or a report, I should say, in Washington state, where they identified, I wish I could I could probably pull up the number here, but something like in Seattle alone, there were something about there was some high, I want to say like $2 billion or $2 million worth of costs that were spent in order to help guide small businesses through all of the regulations that were
Good Lord.
on the book. And it's like, okay, so cool that you're, recognizing that small business owners need the help and you're setting up systems to help through this regulation. Don't you think a much less expensive alternative is, rather than taxing people, than taxing them and spending that tax money on helping them navigate the regulations, is just don't have the regulations to begin with and let there be cheap. Not only is it costly to go through the regulations, stressful to have to figure it out, and then costly in terms of time to go through it all, but you're also getting taxed, and you're getting taxed, and your tax money is being spent on this, where it could have, hypothetically go to other projects that taxes should go for, quote unquote. So it's just bafflingly stupid, the level that regulation plays into these costs. So just you could say nothing else in this tweet. You could just say England blank made a new legal requirement for new homes, and you're already off on the bad foot. That's just the first thing that jumps out to my mind.
Oh, and what's interesting too, is they give the game away when if there's some sort of industry that they want to have more investment in, and someone writes a bill. I can't think of one off the top of my head, unfortunately, but someone writes a bill because they want more housing or they want more whatever. Like, one of the solutions for that is to deregulate it, to incentivize people to invest in that industry. So it's like, well, why not just have that all the time, right? Like the investment usually follows where there is not a lot of regulation. Therefore, that means that there's less risk, there's less cost, there's less barrier of entry for people to get into those industries, and therefore it would follow, right, that if you have regulation, if you force people to do things a certain way, those costs are then going to be passed off somewhere, right? Because they have to be. Nothing would exist, right, if costs weren't passed off or accounted for. So, yeah.
And so the other angle too about this. So I just confirmed that the requirement here is that they have to have connections that allow for gigabit internet. And I just love this nugget here from the article. I wanted to highlight this. So they read, it reads, the new legislation was introduced in December 26th, following a 12-month technical consultation that indicated around 12% of 171,190 new homes constructed in England didn't have gigabit broadband access upon completion.
The horror.
DCMS claims that gigabit broadband is currently available in over 72% of UK households. Okay. And it's targeted for full nationwide coverage by 2030. Okay. So the first thing that I want to say is, it's really funny to say that there's 12% of new homes that are being made that don't have it, but right now it's available in 72% of homes. Like, okay, like I get your goal is to expand it to be 100%, but that's pretty funny to say there are right now the percentage of homes that are being built without it are fewer than the ones that would have access to it regardless. Like, okay. But the other thing to think is, first, this is something that you can upgrade yourself. Now, I think there's also regulations in the UK that make it more difficult to do, but that should be the fix, right? Not forcing another regulation. And so if someone wants to buy a home at a cheaper cost for something like that, and that's one of the ways that they cut costs, that should be an option. Just like with anything else on the market, you should have more options if you want a cheaper product in the short term. Maybe gigabit internet isn't necessary for this person. They don't care. There are still people here who don't even use the internet, let alone people who need a gigabit. Now, I have gigabit internet speeds because I want that. Do I need that? Absolutely not. Everything I do, and I would consider myself a power user, high-end user for the most part. I could be fine on 500 down. I could be fine if I really needed to on like 300 down. The internet needs are not at the point where a gigabit is necessary for every single home in the UK. That is a ridiculous assumption. And then you think, okay, well, what about in the future? We're only going to be relying more and more on the internet. One, probably, but you don't ever want to lock into technology so hard that you can't adapt when creative destruction comes around. Maybe there will be a different way to connect to the internet in the future. Who knows? No one can predict that. That's why it's not good to regulate on things you can't predict, like the future.
And if it was necessary, right? Like, or if it was necessary to function for 100% of people to function, you wouldn't have to mandate it. Like, builders would just include it, right? Like, there's a reason why, I don't even know the stats on it, but basically every home, if it's going to be a home, it's going to have plumbing in it in some form. It's going to have a toilet. It'll probably have a sink, and it will probably have a bathtub. It's probably like the smallest of margins of houses that don't have that. It's because everyone expects that to be there. It's like a necessity. And even if you did away with the code that you had to have those in there, builders would still build it with bathrooms. Like, so yeah.
Well, or not to mention that maybe you buy a small property because you're starting a fixer upper. You don't have much budget because housing costs are mysteriously raising from all these regulations. You find something that doesn't have it, and you think, hey, just like that, that lawnmower that I purchased, I'm going to fix up this house.
Yeah.
I'm going to install plumbing. I'm going to build a bathroom into it. I'm going to make the room myself because I don't have a ton of capital, but I do have time and effort to be able to do this. And it's something that's important to me.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to go about this. The other thing I want to say specifically about the internet too is they did a big study, and I want to say it was Louisiana, or maybe it was nationwide, and the guy, the think tank I read it from was from Louisiana, but I want to say it was a Louisiana study. And obviously Louisiana is one of the lowest rates of internet adoption of all of the states in the United States. Very rural area, not a lot of pickup. And so there's a lot of areas that make it difficult to access. But the number one reason why people didn't have internet wasn't because they couldn't access it, was because they didn't want it, because they didn't care about it. They didn't feel like it was a need for them. They weren't going to spend the money on it, even if it was made available. So all of these government subsidy programs came in like, hey, we're going to bring, internet into these rural areas at a super high cost to the taxpayer so that you guys have access. And they had trouble getting it adopted at all because people just didn't want it there. That's just not what they needed. So this is another area where the government is trying to induce demand where that's not, the market isn't there yet. And that's the beautiful thing about free markets, is that you have the signals. Hey, we want internet. Okay, well, we'll offer it for you to a price. That's too high. Okay, well, we won't offer it there yet, or we'll come down in lower price if that's what negotiates out and if there's enough demand. It all works out in a free market system, but these kinds of regulations just end up adding cost. And then these same people say, why is there so much homelessness? Why are housing prices on the rise? Okay, moving to our last take here. We have, again, a quote tweet. We'll start with the original from Representative Dan Bishop. And this is in regards to the negotiations for the Speaker of the House race, which the holdouts kind of all either voted McCarthy or voted presence, allowing Kevin McCarthy eventually to win after making some negotiations. So Representative Dan Bishop tweets, "With the rules agreements we negotiated, we will have a powerful church-style committee to go after the weaponization of the federal government, the FBI, the DOJ, DHS, and all the rest." So that was one of the concessions that was made amongst those talks. Former Representative David Jolly tweets, "With all the focus on the House rules being given away to the Freedom Caucus at all, this development below may be the most consequential. A new House committee to attack and shred the federal government, undermining confidence for millions of Americans in our self-governance."
Oh, I hadn't read it until this one, man.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Oh, I mean, I knew it was going to be bad when I was hoping that he would tag it with, "This is a good thing," because that's what or not even this is a good thing. I hope they follow through with this implication, because one, I don't think this is going to happen. But two, I mean, his thing of, oh, those that FBI and that CIA and the the ATF, all these people and alphabet agencies that are there to rule you without being elected. If you do away with them, you're not going to be able to self-govern anymore. It's just like, what a bad take, man. Like, what a weird cognitive dissonance to hold. It's just bizarre. I mean, even if you are a lefty, it's just really weird. I don't know. Is he a lefty? Is he conservative? He sounds like he's from Florida.
He was a Republican. I'm pretty sure he was a Republican, but I could be wrong.
Okay. Either way, I mean, even the establishment Republicans and the leftists and all, they want to pretend like they're against the machine, the man. It's like, you don't really get more machine or Big Brother than the FBI and the DOJ and all these guys. Like, I think we all universally should agree they're bad, or at the very minimum, they're not facilitating our self-governance. They try to control as much as they can and take as much freedom away.
Yeah, I laughed at this because the idea that, I mean, even the idea that Americans who would find the result of this, like, oh, there's an investigation going on about the FBI and the DOJ and the DHS, as if that subset, the people who would be quote unquote radicalized by that, aren't already, is just very funny. Right? Yeah. How disconnected are you to think that, after the COVID years, after the Twitter files, after even just the NSA, that there's like this massive population of Americans who are suddenly going to be like, wow, I don't know if I trust the government anymore after this, random House committee is going to investigate it. Like that's such a silly, stupid position to take, in my opinion, for that alone.
Like, okay, let's even take like a more innocent like alphabet agency, like the Department of Licensing, the DOL. Like, I don't think anyone that has ever gone to the DOL and stood in line there and then had the really, really bad service thought that, like, man, like if these guys didn't exist, like my confidence in our ability to self-govern, it goes away. It's like, no, like you go in there and you're like, holy crap, I am at the mercy of incompetence when I walk into this alphabet agency. The same people, the same mindset, the same problems that results from the DOL, I mean, not result, that are at the DOL are also present in all these other agencies, the CIA, the FBI, because the same type of sickness undergirds all of it, right? You've got people who are in control and in authority that have never been elected, that have not been chosen, that you have not voluntarily given your business to, or your not even allegiance, but like you're like, I want to engage in services. You are forced to engage in services with them. That is the sickness that undergirds the DOL. It's also the sickness that undergirds the police departments, as well as the sickness of the FBI and the CIA and all these places. So you have less self-governance because you are forced to use these places. And it's just crazy. It's like, it's almost like, have you played with the chat GPT thing yet?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's like someone typed in, David Jolly's just chat GPT for, the establishment. Like, how do I convince Americans that what I want is good? Oh, it's a threat to our democracy and self-governance. Right. It's like, no, it's not.
No, yeah. Well, and I mean, even to still be in the position where you are actively defending these is just, I mean, we kind of take it for granted just because I feel so typical of someone like him to think that way. But that is actually pretty remarkable too, if you think about it, right? That after, the revelations about the coordination between different branches, including the CIA, trying to silence people, and the absolute hoax of even something like the Russia investigation, like the Russian collusion, stuff from Trump. The fact that there is still someone who is on the holdout of, boy, we can't undermine the confidence people have in the government. Like what are you smoking? Like what the fact that you don't think that there is cause for investigation is more alarming and causes me to doubt the government almost more than the need for the investigation itself. You know what I mean? Like, you were a member of Congress, you were a government official, and your absolute lack of ability to see the fact that it needs the kind of policing that they're doing, which I don't think will be successful, but in a perfect world, those agencies do need that kind of oversight and policing. They need something to be held accountable. And the fact that you can't see that makes me skeptical of the American government and way more than the fact that they're putting these committees together ever could.
It's just, I don't know, man. I look at, we all kind of acknowledge, like, in the medieval times or in even just 300 years ago, that like there were people and bad actors, kings, barons, whatever, that like exercise control and without the will of the people, or and forced involuntary servitude and all sorts of things. And somehow we think that those people went away, or people that have those motivations went away in our modern day, or that the people that govern us today don't have those motivations. And it's like, no, they exist. They're just really good at hiding, and they hide behind these alphabet agencies and behind being a bureaucrat. They're not elected. They are able to stay in power long after people's terms expire. And it's not even like we have to look back 300 years ago to a robber baron. It's like you look at freaking J. Edgar Hoover. Like, it's like we all accept that he was putting pressure on elected officials all the way up to and including the president to do the things that he wanted them to do. It's like, do you think that just went away magically in the past 30 years? Like, were we more? Was him being able to pressure the president to do things? Was that an example of good self-governance or tyranny? It's like, oh no, we all accept that as tyranny. That is still present today. Why would we want to not have oversight of that? Again, like you said, and I've said, Dan Bishop and all these Freedom Caucus folks, they're not going to do anything about it. I mean, they'll have some showboat things, and it will make their base happy about it. But any actual substantive stuff that could actually come at a cost to them, nah, they're not going to do anything about it, because at the end of the day, these tyrants in these alphabet agencies are going to put pressure on them, all the way up to and maybe even including jail time or death. And nothing's going to change, until the American people decide, well, we're just not going to listen to a word these people say.
Yeah. Well, and, just for the last thing I'll say, to harp on the J. Edgar Hoover point, he was pretty brazen and pretty open about the level of corruption he was in. And it's pretty well known now. But think about all the things that we don't know. Even if you took half of what J. Edgar Hoover was and put that into the next person, that's still a whole lot of corruption and a whole lot of power, way more than should be in any position of control of anything, let alone directly kind of over your life. And so, there's so much that we do know, but there's so much more that they are hiding.
Yeah.
And so, just by its very nature, the fact that someone doesn't want more oversight, even if they don't want more oversight in name only, like that's a position, that's a wild position to take. Just a pretty terrible take to end on here. So with that, we will wrap up. Thank you guys so much for listening. We always appreciate it. Again, if you want to comment with anything that you think we got wrong or that you agree with, or send us your takes for us to review, we also love that. We welcome all that kind of interaction. Subscription, reviews helps us out a lot. So thank you for that, and we'll see you on the next one.